Good morning, everyone. My name is Mروة and I am a master's student at the University of Basra Department of Translation. And my study is about the impact of gender on simultaneous interpreting quality in violence against women context. So before I start my presentation, I'm going to mention a very simple example to illustrate what the idea is all about and why I took such an interest in this topic. So هل في مرة شفت رجال يركض في الشارع واستغربت الموضوع وأشرت عليه أنت وصديقك وقلت إيش قد عيب مننا ناس ما يصير؟ لا. ولكن لو تغير هذا الدور وكان الشخص اللي يركض في الشارع هو امرأة، كان راح تكون الكثير من التعبيرات، الكثير من الإشارات والكثير من كلمة عيب مع أنه الفعل كان نفسه. So this is a clear example of double standards in our society. Many behaviors are considered normal or even funny when a man do them, but when a woman do the same, they face judgment and strange looks. So the problem is that this perception is often deeply rooted in our society, in our traditions, in our customs, where in reality it is neither logical nor fair. So now as I cleared that, we're going to move on with the presentation. Simultaneous interpreting, as we all know, is a real-time translation, where interpreters convey speech instantly, often in conferences or live events. Hence, it requires a quick thinking, linguistic skills, and cultural awareness for accurate communication. And that's why it can be affected by empathy, anger, or similar emotions, especially when in translating or interpreting a sensitive content, like violence against women, such as harassment or rape. These internalized gender norms and suicidal expectations can subtly affect their performance, and not only their performance, but how you, the audience, can perceive their work. Moving on to the aim of this study explores gender differences in simultaneous interpreting, but within the sensitive society of Iraq. So the first aim is to investigate the influence of gender on the amount of information conveyed. Second, to examine how empathy would influence the interpreting performance in both men and women. And third is to determine whether or not the audience can perceive the gender of the interpreter based on their interpreting style. Which brings us to the methodology I used for this study. For this study, I conducted a 15-minute speech recounting a rape victim experience. The speaker was a woman, delivering the speech with anxiety in her voice to heaten up emotional impact. So as a side note, there wasn't really a rape victim. I hired an actress and made her act terrifying, shaking, crying, to really test how empathy would affect both genders. The participants I chose for this study were 12 advanced fourth stage students, and I divided them into two groups based on gender, 6 males and 6 females. Moving on to the important part, which is the analysis. The first study was an experiment intended to assess the amount of information conveyed by a group of female interpreters in comparison to the amount of information conveyed by a group of male interpreters. So the initial hypothesis for this study was that people of the same gender will feel more empathy towards each other as opposed to the other people. So that assuming that the female interpreters will experience a higher degree of empathy towards the female speaker rather than the male interpreters. So let's check if that's actually true. The result showed that the average error rating made by female interpreters was 8.5, whereas the average error rating made by male interpreters was 7.5. As we can see, there was no significant difference in the amount of information conveyed. Both interpreters did actually well in conveying most of the information. However, it is interesting to mention that the female interpreters as a group, they did this one thing. They omitted and deleted some of the words from the original speech because they were aib to say it as an Iraqi woman in our culture. Moving on to the analysis number 2, which is empathy and self-perception. This study was a post-experimental questionnaire. So after the interpreting assignment was done, all the subjects of the first study were given a short written questionnaire to fill in while they are still in the booth, so that the sensation they felt while interpreting would be still fresh in their minds. And they were given all the time needed to finish the questionnaire, which was about first, whether they empathized with the victim, second, how empathy did influence their performance, and third, their perception of their own interpreting. So the results showed that 50% of female interpreters actually admitted that empathy did influence their performance negatively. And that is because they internalized the victim emotion. They visualize themselves as being the victim since they share the same gender and the same circumstances of living here as an Iraqi woman. whereas 60% of male interpreters said that empathy did not influence their performance at all. And that's not because they didn't feel any empathy. They empathize with the victim, but from an external point of view, because they don't share nor the gender nor the circumstances of living here as an Iraqi woman. Moving on to the last analysis, which was the audience perception. The last analysis involved 18 participants divided into two groups. The first group was a phonology, translation, and linguistics student with a background of language knowledge. And the second group was a general audience with no background of language knowledge whatsoever. So the initial hypothesis for this study was that the first group will actually detect the subtle linguistic differences between female and male interpreters. However, shockingly, the results showed that both groups, even the general audience, could actually determine which interpreting was a female interpreting and which interpreting was for a male interpreting. Moving on to the discussion, the result challenged common assumption about gender and empathy. Despite social beliefs that women are more empathetic, both men and women showed high level of empathy. However, the women internalized the victim emotion, while the men distanced themselves, as always, by viewing from an external point of view. For this conclusion, there is no strong evidence that both the speaker and the interpreter should be of the same gender. However, the audience could detect the subtle linguistic differences between female and male interpreters. And there is one important point I really want to mention, which is one weakness of this study is the limited amount or the limited number of participants. Since the sample was limited, it's hard to apply the result to a large group nor make a good conclusions. So hopefully in the future, I could enhance this study and make it more valid with the guide of our professors. And thank you all for your listening.